We have about half an hour for question and answers. Oh, that's okay, thanks. I'd like to open questions to the floor. I'll take 3 questions at one time, possibly. And Liana, you, sir, and you, Catherine.
Hi, I'm Liana. If you need an affiliation, I would say an online petition named I Am 26. So I guess when we talk about Sharia law or hudud, there is always that argument about it being divine, right? And as Prof. Shad rightly says, the book itself is divine, but interpretation is human. I'd like to ask the panel your comments about even reading the Quran in terms of culture, because I think that what we adopt as Islam in this country is actually Arabic. And what are your comments on that?
Hello, yeah, sorry. Robert Fu here, basically from SABM and a regular attender of our IRF forums. I say that because in many of the forums and discussions that we have gone through, we keep on hearing speakers trying to sort of out-argue, so to speak, you know, with the fundamentalists and extremist groups by still by going back to the Quran and quoting various verses, which is fine, because, I mean, if you're a Muslim, you go back to the Quran. If you're a Christian, you tend to go back to the Bible and things like that. But the problem is that the extremist groups are also quoting from the Quran, okay? So the issue now is that who is shouting the loudest, okay? And who's got all the financial backing to shout even louder and more continuously? It seems to me that me as a concerned citizen, you know, and also now becoming a more concerned citizen, is that are we really winning the debate here? Are we winning the minds and the hearts of the people in Malaysia? So now the problem I seem to see is that the so-called Islamofascism, you know, is being institutionalized in this country. If it's actually in the personal space, I mean, Puan already mentioned something about, you know, if you mention that to the Christians that Christ is not, you question the deity of Christ, you say he's not God, but he's a human, and that the Christians will feel offended. I'm a Christian, I'm not offended. Why is that so? Why is it that some people are offended and some are not? So this is the thing we are saying. And frankly, if you go back in this sort of forums, going back to quoting the Quran, the scriptures, anything like that, you know, from the kind of opinions and comments that I hear in the Facebook and all my friends, some of my friends, all my friends, and many of them are Muslims, they will say that, well, Puan Nuria, first of all, kamu tak pakai tudung, so we don't listen to you. That's the comment. That is the comment, right? And you know, and for me it's even worse. You know, kamu kafir, how to listen to you? Correct? So that is the kind of comment you hear. So how are you going to address those things, especially for the fact that because many of the prevailing narrative is supported by institutionalized religion. How do you address that? So there is always this question of free will. And whenever I have been to some of the forums, when you talk about, free will, you know, the extremists will say free will, are you saying that if free will you can say anything, you can insult everybody, kind of thing? Whoever said that is insulting? Whoever talk, no moderate person will want to insult. When we are talking about in human rights, in one of the forums where Dr. Farah was in, and we're talking about sexual education, immediately the extremists say, are you talking about sex with animals and all that? I'm like, what? Where did we come from, you know? So, but they have a louder voice, okay? And one of the reasons is because of the institutionalization of that kind of opinion. How do you address that? So that's my question.
Just very 3 quick points. I think yesterday, I said my name, Nicole. Nicole, I'm a freelance journalist. So I just, very quick, 3 clarifications. I think it's not a silenced majority of people, it's a silenced majority of people. we have a corporate media in this country who does not cover people's stories, everyday people's stories who are resisting and giving a different alternative. So to call them the silenced majority and not the silenced majority by the corporate media in this country, that's one fact I would like to put. And I saw a lot of mixing up of Muslims and Islams, and let's make a distinction that Muslims are Muslims and Islam is Islam. The theology is different from the people who practice it. So that's, but let me get down to the point of your point. I think, sir, the problem when you speak about things, you put democracy and you put human rights on the pedestal, and everything is compared to it, and everything which does not fit into the leverage of it seems to be incompatible. Everything has been compatible with it. The problem is you should contest the very notion of nation states, because communities which were living in very community-based became nation states, was centralized. So maybe we should deconstruct nation states. We should deconstruct the Western democratic project of democracy. This is something we should contest, whether democracy is for the corporate-funded politicians or is it for the people who are really benefiting from a trickle-down economic model. We should contest that before we begin with. And that goes to my few last point. The fact is, when we talk about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, we need to talk about the fact that when the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was actually started, the first generation of the human rights was actually just political and social rights. Economic rights were only a third generation within the UNDHR. And even that was actually done by the third world countries. Dr. Farida talks a lot about religious extremism, but I often don't hear enough about economic terrorism that is vulnerabilizing people at the bottom of this country at tremendous rate. We should talk about the greater concerns and not just about the minority middle class views, because it's the large extent of economic terrorism. And we should talk about the language, the very European masculinist, individualistic language of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The universality project is not just about cultural relativity, but it's about cultural hegemony which is being imposed. I think so, sir. Because these countries who colonized many countries could right away their wrongs and right away their do's. Just day one and could go back. So this brings to my last very short point is the fact that never mind the fact that George Bush actually invaded Afghanistan with a clear stance of saying, we want to invade Afghanistan to free the women of their burqas, to bomb themselves to a feminist heaven. Never mind, he literally said that. Never mind, human rights is the reason why sanctions are being imposed upon the poorest countries, where the poorest people. What is wrong for countries to reimagine solidarity, because universality has been an impediment to solidarity. We should be focusing on solidarity, which is what I think so many Muslims, when Islam has become a religion of, every Muslim is a terrorist. Muslims are feeling threatened. If Muslims are defensive, we should understand why they're defensive. At an age in which every Muslim is terrorized, droned, and killed in so many countries. So I think we should address all of this and also say why Islamic State come about. It did not just come about, it's because Iraq was invaded. So that I would love some people to address in this panel, if you could, to contest the UNDHR and also more,
Thank you.
Right, okay, thanks. You've given me a lot to think about there, and a lot to respond to. Let me take it in the order that came. The problem, I think Professor Faruqi put it very well, that the book itself should be considered sacred, but it is the question of interpretation. And as you know, there's been a huge debate in Islam about how does one interpret and who can interpret it, etc. I do think that we're now well beyond the idea about the inability, the impermissibility of translation of the Quran, that we've now accepted that it should be for dawah purposes or whatever, or just simply for the purposes of comprehension, that it should be in vernacular languages. So I think that insofar as that does occur, that in itself is good. That's important. Whether there's a particular kind of Arabist slant to it, I mean, I think that perhaps is occurring partly for politics, for political reasons. The sort of influence from Saudi Arabia, the Gulf, etc. And that's a bit, I think, unfortunate in its, but it shouldn't get away from the larger project of being able to vernacular languages. The question about how do we prevail against these mindsets because they're institutionalized? Well, if I knew, I'd make a lot of money. I don't have a simple answer to that. I think you've heard me say this, and I do think that part of the problem of the modern Islamic experience is the bureaucratization of Islam, whereby there has been this attempt to institutionalize it, and therefore it magnifies the voice. By the same token, I suppose one could say that it's a kind of Islamist institutionalization too, which is presenting various views. That's inevitable. I think the structuring of viewpoints and attitudes is just going to occur naturally. How do you do it? I think it's the great debate, everybody has to participate in it. Other groups, civil society groups, non-governmental organizations, concerned individuals just have to jump into the debate and I think contribute to it. So I don't think I do say this though. You said, how do you deal with minds and hearts? And I think you do have to frame it within a kind of an Islamic perspective. And you do have to understand, so we can't simply say, and as I think we've all said in some ways, that the Sharia is their part of the society. It does have meaning. It is of not only symbolic importance, but kind of real importance to many people. So you can't just simply dismiss it. You have to address it and formulate a kind of arguments on the basis of it. So I think that's important. And I link that with I think very perceptive comments. I mean, I think I'm a little bit more complex than the way you put it.
Have the time, I'll be complex.
I accept the fact that there's cultural coding to everything. I think there's cultural coding to everything. So my interpretation is perhaps culturally coded. I think that when we address the question of human rights, there probably is a Western sort of bias to it. I think we all made that clear, that we question the kind of embeddedness of ideas within the so-called universal agenda. So granted. Now, do you want me to say that democracy is a bad idea? If you want me to say that, if you want me to say that democracy is not practiced in the way that the ideal says, then I totally agree with that. I completely agree that there has been a failure of democracy virtually everywhere. But I don't backtrack, and I heard you as saying this. I do not backtrack from the idea of saying that it's an ideal.
Sorry, what I meant is that democratic frameworks exist within a framework of a nation state.
No, I get that.
As academics and as intellectuals,
yeah,
to deconstruct it, not to say against it,
yeah,
but at least give it a bit of deconstruction. I think you're oversimplifying tremendous lots of issues. Like you're putting everything it has to be incompatible with democracy and human rights, and without it, it's not right. So
yeah. Okay, fair point. To which I'd only respond, yeah, obviously, I'm putting it in the nation-state framework. Yeah, obviously, I'm putting it in the frame. No, obviously, because it's the real world we're working in. So I think that there has to be, would it be better to have a world which supersedes the nation-state?
There is already. There's many communities living outside the model.
Yeah, and again, I don't dispute that. I mean, there are globalized networks. There are globalized networks of advocacy. There are globalized networks that deal with environmentalism. There are globalized networks that deal with refugees, that deal with all kinds of questions. That's good. I mean, I don't disagree with that. I think that's perfectly fine. But I don't see how that this is inconsistent with anything that I have said. So I let others jump in here.
I'll just comment.
All right.
I think I just comment to Robert's question with regard to, like, you see that the progressives and liberals were still quoting interpreted in a way that is more, how do I say, compatible with the modern concept of democracy, human rights, and so on and so forth, and who's basically winning the war. But I think that if you were to read the Quran, there you can find like, Prof. Piscatori quoted the Mu'tazilite, the rationalist. They lived in the 3rd century, and it was during that time that Islamic civilization was at its highest, all right? We call it zenith, right? Mm-hmm. Zenith, yeah. So, and what was the reason? To me, why at that time there was this Baitul Hikmah, the house of wisdom, and at that time we saw, mathematicians, astronomers, physicians, physicists, chemists, and all sorts of professionals, what we call as professionals today, specialists, live in that period. It was, to me, it was because of the foundation of the philosophical foundation of the Mu'tazilites. The philosophical foundation of the Mu'tazilite is based on reason. And that the most important concept of the Mu'tazilite is that there cannot be any contradiction between what is in the Quran and what is reason. Between reason and Quran. Between akal and nakal. So that's very important, right? So if there seems to be a contradiction between the two, then there must be something wrong in understanding probably what is known as nakal or nas or the Quran itself or the text. So it must be compatible. The problem nowadays is that we are saying that, we want to understand Quran literally. So this literal interpretation is espoused by many Salafis and by many Hizbut Tahriris. Tahriris and Salafis, basically to me, they share the same domain, that is to be a literalist. And this is very important, very dangerous to the current civilization. So the thing that I'm trying to say, I'm trying to tell you that it is time for people like us, for the people like us who promoted, لِقَوْمِ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ, that's our tagline, for people who think, because we want to rejuvenate this rationalist agenda again, so that people will understand that that's the importance of us. I said it's un-Malaysian to think.
Un-Malaysian to think. Yeah, probably it's un-Malaysian to think. But that's the whole agenda. I think we need to ask people to think. Because one of these fundamental concept of a philosophical fundamental concept of the Mu'tazila at that time was that a pen of a warrior is mightier than a pen of a scholar is mightier than a sword of a warrior. So that's very important. This is a very, very important concept.
Except for the Sedition Act.
Except for the Sedition Act, yeah.
People have no enough time to work and put food on the table. We have a media which feeds into a narrative which is so totalitarian. And we're talking about people to think as if they're not thinking. I think it's very condescending towards everyday people who have to work to put food on the table and actually affect. People like in this country are defending what they affect. That is something we should talk about. And we affect a single narrative because we do not have independent media in this country.
That's all?
The media is a central role, I feel.
Just to, follow up on what Dr. Farouk said in answer to Robert's question. Robert, we have to be pragmatic because we have to engage the Islamists, especially the bureaucrats, the religious bureaucrats, who are accusing everybody. They're accusing sisters in Islam, they're accusing all the NGOs of not having the qualification to talk about Islam, which is ridiculous. I mean, Islamic laws affect us as Muslims, and we are the stakeholders, and surely we can engage with them in a discourse and in a debate, especially when we feel that the legislation is based on the wrong interpretation of the Quran. So that is why it's incumbent upon Muslims, to get out of ignorance and educate themselves and engage these people in the language that they speak. Because otherwise, they will say that, no, you are not qualified because you don't have the credentials and so on. But the reality in this country is that many of our so-called Islamic scholars and the employees of the religious authorities are not very, I would say they have a very shallow understanding. They are not real scholars, because most of them, well, maybe it's different now, but a lot of them go to Al-Azhar and do a diploma course because they come from the Pondok schools, they do not have pre-university qualifications and so on. And I've been told by a professor of Al-Azhar, this was some years back, by the late Fatih Osman, that what happens is that some of them don't even have Form 5, let alone Form 6. So what they do is they designed a diploma course for them, which was just a very shallow teaching of the various subjects in Islamic law. So that is a problem, and they come back here and they declare themselves as ulamas, and they are totally intolerant of dissenting views, of other views. So that is why, as I said, it's incumbent upon us to educate ourselves and to challenge, and to challenge these people. Otherwise, we are going to be, they are going to consign us to Taliban hell if we allow them. And what we need to do, especially the civil society organizations, we need to constantly put pressure and to question. And the situation has been compounded by the fact that Islam has been so politicized, or politics has been so Islamized in this country. And the ruling party, the opposition, and especially the results of the last 2 elections have forced them, because the ruling party has lost the confidence of the urban Malays, of the non-Malays, of course. So now they're depending on the votes of the rural Malays, where religion is very important, and they're doing that in competition with PAS. So now UMNO itself must try to outpass PAS. They have to appear more Islamic than PAS. Not that their lifestyle reflect, their deep faith in Islam or their belief in the teachings of Islam, but all this is done for political reasons, and we are the victims. In answer to Liana's question about Sharia, I don't claim to be an expert in Sharia, but as we have discussed before, there's so many versions of Sharia. And Sharia is man-made. Even all our Islamic laws, the Sharia laws, whether it's the family laws or whether it's the Islamic criminal law enactments, they are made in the various state assemblies. Or for federal territory, they're made in parliament. Maybe the source is divine. They claim that the source is divine, but certainly the product is man-made and subject to their own understanding of what Sharia is, or of what the Quran is. And in many cases, it's a very limited understanding. So it is incumbent upon us to keep on challenging them, because to do otherwise, we'll be going down the slippery slope. Thank you.
Yeah, Liana, your statement about interpretations, I totally agree with you. My experience as a law student and law teacher is that words are not crystals, transparent, unchanging. They are, as a jurist said, they are the skin of a living thought, and their color changes from time to time. I think interpretations can certainly vary, and indeed they do. For example, I read an article about the Quranic punishment for theft. The author says, and he is an Arabic-speaking person, I can't evaluate him, I know only Arabic enough to read the Quran. He says the punishment for theft could be interpreted, the word could be interpreted to mean sever, it could also be interpreted to mean disable. So he says that opens up a new vista of possibilities. So for example, on the issue of polygamy, clearly there are several passages, there's no one passage. There's one passage that says you can take 2, 3 or 4. Another passage says treat them equally, and there's a passage which says then it's impossible to treat them equally. So what's the message of the Quran then? I think that's a matter of interpretation. There are in the past, I don't know whether it's what happened to the law today. At one time Tunisia passed a law saying no polygamy. No polygamy. The Prophet could have treated them equally, not you. So no polygamy. Inheritance, yes, there is unequal treatment for women, but there is the permission to set up gifts, hiba. And for example, I grapple with these as a Muslim, as a father, as a husband. My oldest child is a son. My youngest is a daughter. Why should my youngest daughter get lesser than my oldest son? He's working, he's earning as much as I'm earning. Why should my daughter get lesser? So, but I'm a Muslim, I'm subject to the Sharia law. I'm going to create a gift for her in my lifetime. I've done that so that she doesn't get any more. So there are ways of solving these problems. In Singapore, in many other countries, the Muslims arbitrary power to grant, to talaq a wife has been subjected to reinterpretation. They say no, if it's talaq in one breath, even if it's 30 times or 33 times, it counts as one, because one is revocable. It has to be on separate occasions. In fact, in Pakistan, in the 70s, before the Ziaul Haq regime came on, they began to say you can't divorce arbitrarily, because there's a passage in the Quran which says of all the permissible things, this is the most abhorrent of all permissible things. So they say no, you must come to the court. It must be a judicial decision. We also adopted that law here. The only thing is Muslims go ahead and do the divorce, then they go to the court, they pay a fine, and the court then regularizes it. So actually, without doubt, interpretations, constructive interpretations to make the law as good as can be from the point of view of justice, humanity, it is possible. However, as Professor correctly pointed out, the bureaucratization, and Robert, you said institutionalization of religious extremism has become a serious problem. There are no simple solutions. Those of us who don't agree with what's going on, we have to raise our voice of concern, but of course lone voices may not always achieve much. So we have to combine together. These days technology is available. I think the groups must get together. I think we must have more volunteers so that some do the writing and some do all the work of spreading it. I like the way the Jewish lobby in the USA really attacks anyone that in their view is unfair to Israel or to the Jews. They really come out. I think we should learn from Israel. We should learn from Israel and how they actually fight back over everything that they are not in agreement with. So I totally agree with Juliana. Its interpretations are clearly multiple. There are many rules of interpretation, but the golden rule is that there is no golden rule. Surely, and in the case of the Quran, another very complex, I won't say problem, but it's a complex situation, is that the ayat are not chronological. It's not that Iqra bismi rabbikal lazi khalaq, it didn't come as number one. Actually, it's way down in the Quran. So the first ayat which says read, that didn't come as number one. So there is the issue of later overriding former. There is the issue of Makkah versus Medina verses. In the Makkah verses tended to be a little bit more authoritarian, more there was less tolerance because there was war. But once Islamic society was established, stabilized, I think the Medina verses are much more. So I totally agree with Juliana. This interpretation is possible. I'm not really in a position to comment on much of what Nikhil said, but you're obviously a very thinking person. Are you Malaysian?
Three quick questions because we're running out of time. You put up your hand earlier. Robert, you've already asked. Sorry? Yeah, okay. Can I get the other three first, and you, sir, and you? Okay.
Thank you. My name is Aizat Shamsuddin. I'm a student. I would like to ask a question. I would like to direct my question specifically to Prof. Shad, and other panels can feel free to answer. I believe that blasphemy is one of the, as part of the freedom of expression in, as declared in the universal human rights. So I think that blasphemy law, blasphemous statements, I think it's, people think that this is something to do about, people criticize the elements or the inviolable concepts in religion. So it's very, prohibited in the Muslim country. So I think that I understand that blasphemy law is a need in a Muslim country whereby they want to avoid any provocation against Muslim extremists, from being retaliated, from being bombed and whatsoever. For example, as we see in Texas, how they draw the picture of Muhammad, Prophet Muhammad, and so on. So we see, but I see this is kind of a check and balance, especially in the institutionalized religion, for example, in Malaysia and also in other countries, as to rectify and to correct their distorted implementation of religion. And also I see that when we set up make it legislative, or make a official blasphemy law in a country, for example Pakistan and also Saudi Arabia, how these people like Vina Malik and also Raif Badawi had been convicted of this blasphemy law and received a very disproportionate and also unjustified, sort of punishment. So I think that how the harm is that when this controlled, the government will interpret what is the extension or what is the degree to interpret what amounts to blasphemous and whatnot, right? So I think that. My question is that how do you do you still draw a total restriction on blasphemous statements, and how does that even degrade any values in the religion itself? So that's my question.
Yeah. So keep it short, please. Yeah. The question.
There was an anecdote pointed out by Raja Petra saying that in the 1930s, or was it in the 1920s, the Sultan of Kelantan, the Palace of Kelantan, had a discussion of whether dogs are allowed to be kept by Muslims or not. And there was discussion, there was ijtihad. So my question is, when did ijtihad completely stop in Malaysia? Because we're not having that discussion. There was the Know Your Dog, there was like this dog petting event that was widely ridiculed and widely condemned by religious authorities. And that, that contrasts with what happened in the 1930s. So in Malaysia and perhaps in the wider Islamic world, when did ijtihad stop? And just a quick question to Professor Shad Salim Faruqi. If you were advising, this is just a fun question, if you were advising the past Kelantan government on how to enact hudud or how to pass hudud through parliament, what is the best way to do it? Just what's the easiest way to do it?
Thank you. Okay. Third question. Yeah.
Assalamualaikum and a very good afternoon. Thank you to all the panelists. I have two questions here. Is it possible to give two questions, or I need to cut into one? Cut it into one. Okay. I have a question for Professor Piscatori, and this is quite theoretical one, I hope. So, when we look at the debate between human rights and religious rights, for example, between Islamists and Muslim groups, and in Muslim majority countries, the debate will be stagnant because it will divide people into those who are pro-human rights and those who are anti-human rights. And then one camp saying that Islam is compatible with human rights, and other group saying that Islam is not compatible with human rights. However, is there any way, or there should be any way to go about this? For example, I think the argument put forward by Cook and Lawrence in one of their influential papers on how we could build human rights on the basis of traditional Muslim scholarship. I think that is one of the most interesting paths that we can take. For example, they are referring to some hawzah in Qom focusing on producing women scholars. Now, the discourse of traditional Islam itself, if we look today, remains static. The thing is, because as have been argued by other traditional scholars such as Syed Hussein Nasser, he seems to be very confident on traditional Islam to face all the challenges of modernity. But however, if we look at the current situation, it seems to be static virtually everywhere. So my question is the structure and nature of the traditional Islamic scholarship itself is incapable of facing modernity, or if we look after the collapse of the Khalifa, the discourse of Muslims have gone through a series of modernization towards Islamism and modern power discourse of the Islamists. So is the structure of the traditional scholarship itself is static, or the discourse of modern Islamists is more appealing to Muslims, making us, trapped in this impasse? Thank you.
I think just to add, because I definitely totally appreciate and really am happy to see that there is voice of moderation from the G20, the Growth of 25, and from the IRF forums. And I totally agree with that, and I think that should continue. I mean, I'm not saying that you should stop. Please don't, because that should continue. But what I'm trying to say is that I think the issue we are facing is that the extreme voices are having institutional strength. Okay, they have strong financing and things like that because of the institutional strength. So if you're going to go and basically try and fight the mountain, this is so huge. I think it's going to be quite an uphill battle. Okay, so I think then goes back to yesterday's discussion: should the state be secular or have this kind of a religious influence? So maybe the solution is, if when we are trying to address it and trying to so-called solve this problem, I don't know whether we can do it, but it's actually to deinstitutionalize religion and bring it down to its private space or group space. You can have your Shari'a laws or Christian laws or whatever, but at a private space. I mean, you can have groups to decide, and if you agree, and I like that statement yesterday, in the sense that I do not want to get involved with, it's okay to have discussions with God and all that, but, the last statement, remember? I can't remember it, but provided.
I don't want to encounter God in the public sphere unless
I want to. That should be the way. Then you deinstitutionalize religion, because once you institutionalize religion, you have to codify and say, this version of religion is by law correct. Once you start codifying, then that's where the Ahmadis get affected, the Shias get affected, and even the other schools, the Hanbalis and the Malikis will get affected because you only follow the Shafi'i school. Once you start codifying, you have to say this is right and this is wrong. And that's the problem with institutionalizing religion. Okay, so that's my point, basically.
Yeah.
Can I respond to you, Robert? Your idea that they have louder voices, you were saying earlier, right? But are they rational voices? Yeah, I mean, they're becoming more and more irrational. I mean, you look at responses to the gymnasts, the poor gymnasts, for example, people begin to see how stupid they are, right? How ridiculous they are. And as that increases, irrespective of the institutional support itself, I believe, is crumbling, right? There's a crisis there, the institutional support. So I think one has to look at the positive side of things as well. Yeah, that despite all that, they might have the louder voices, but their voices increasingly do not make sense. Yeah, even to the simplest of people in many ways. If you want to, I think increasingly they're not making sense.
Yeah, the problem with that kind of logic is that this is a typical strategy of giving a person enough rope, then he will hang himself. Okay, but the problem is that before he hangs himself, there will be a lot of collateral damage.
Yeah, in fact, but. He's already started it, so to speak, right? And there are voices that are against that right now. And I think this particular loud voice is becoming more and more irrational, perhaps, grasping at straws, and and therefore they are losing. I think they will lose at some point. I'm being an optimist.
Okay. Okay. I'll just do the last two questions. Last couple. The ijtihad one was really interesting. I think here's what I would say, and by the way, there is a big historical debate about this. There's a very famous article by an Islamic law specialist, Wael Halak, which is entitled, "Was the door of ijtihad closed?" And because this is the general assumption, his argument, but we now have to contextualize this, his argument was it was never closed, that throughout the centuries it was open in the sense that there were qadi judgments, in the sense that there were fatwas, over and over and over again. So all those centuries where supposedly it was closed, people were using reason in a way to do it. Now, but it still doesn't get at the big point, which is I think what you're getting at. It is, when do you use this reason for the reinterpretation of major ideas? Not just for the kind of small, incremental changes that might occur, but when we're talking about really big ideas. And that is true, that has been curtailed in the medieval the period into the modern period. So we are now faced with what Dr. Farooq was saying, that really we have embedded within Islam that tradition which says we should be able to use reason to interpret large ideas. And I think that now increasingly understood that that's needed. But of course it's being countered by others. And putting it a little bit, even going a little bit further, some people have said, all the bad guys are exercising ijtihad too.
Yeah, I see.
So it's not that ijtihad isn't there, it's just that we mean it's not the right kind of ijtihad. So we want to encourage that bit of it, and surely there is embedded in Islam the rationalist position, which hopefully would allow you to deal with some of those in a sort of a better sort of way. And picking up Hasman's point, I know what you're getting at, and it's a big debate. Let me just reformulate your question. Is there anything in traditional Islam which would preclude this kind of ijtihad and this kind of development? No. And in fact, I think in some ways what we've all been arguing is the first principles need to be recovered. The first principles need to be reaffirmed. They're there. If that's what you mean, if that's what we mean by traditional Islam, then that's good. That's good. We want to get back to those and to kind of strip away all the accretions that have occurred and distorted it. So I've kind of reinterpreted what you say, but I think it's definitely it's embedded in it. And bad news for Robert, I think institutionalization is inevitable. I think totally agree with you. If you were to say to me in one sentence, what's the big enemy from modern Islam, I would say it's more the bureaucratization than it is maybe fundamentalism. It's the bureaucratization. It's the presumption that you should speak on behalf of my God. And I think you're absolutely right to invoke that statement of Charles Taylor, which it would be better if we could think of it not in terms of institutionalized religion, but in terms of faith. But I think that's nice in a seminar. I think I think the real world is institutionalization does occur, and so we have to think of a way to counter the bad voices.
Two questions to answer, and a quick comment for Robert. Institutionalization is not simply a religious issue. There are economic implications. These people will never give up their power because of the tremendous economic benefit that they receive. The budget for the federal territory, Jakim, is 600 million ringgit. Now, don't expect them to give that up. So, what is regarded as actually a religious struggle actually is basically a very economic struggle for more positions, more power, more money. 600. Okay, now Aizat, blasphemy law. Really, there is no need to adopt an all or nothing attitude that we must allow so much free speech, that there should be no restriction because the blasphemy laws are being abused. I personally think, and that's my own personal opinion, that while I think there should be free speech, it's not always right to use our rights. I think in every civilized society, we must observe some restraints. Religion is a matter which is emotional, and we can't deny that around the world. And religion is a matter on which there are public order implications. I noticed that in many countries, if you attack people on grounds of race, that's hate speech. So if hate speech can be permitted as a restriction on free speech, then I don't see why blasphemy also could not be. This kind of secular militancy, that everything else is all right, but religion should not be protected. Now, I don't think that's fair enough. So I totally agree with you that the punishment that is being administered in Pakistan is brutal, unnecessary. I think a law punishing blasphemy need not be totally criminal. We could follow, for example, the Race Relations Act in the UK, whereby the first attempt is at conciliation. And only when conciliation fails, then there is some punishment. Certainly, there is no need to flog people or to send them to long terms of sentences. So punishment is a separate thing, but I would not agree that freedom of speech should include the right to blasphemy. No. Truth is not always important. Sometimes, despite truth, you should not be allowed to say some things. For example, in race relations law, doesn't matter what the empirical data may say, but I can't tell someone, hey, you and your community are stupid. No, I should not be allowed to do that because it doesn't matter what data I have. Okay, so I think we should walk the middle path here. On the issue of dogs, actually, dogs were allowed as for guard purposes. Dogs were allowed if you have sheep and cows and to herd them. Dogs were even allowed if you went hunting and you shot a bird, the dog would go and collect the bird and bring it for you. So they were never haram, they were najis. And that too, there is a way of washing. I understand now there is a soap available. So you don't have to use soil. 10 technology has caught up now. So I think the reaction of the some Muslims is basically based on ignorance. Ignorance. Many of these things are basically prejudices born out of ignorance. Now the next question was about hudud law. You are being a little bit naughty by asking me to give free legal advice. I think why don't you ask PAS to contact me, and then I'll give them a consultancy. They should not get this advice free. There are ways, but I'm not going to mention right now till they appoint me as a consultant. I have to say this, on the Constitution, the hudud laws of Terengganu and Kelantan are as constitutional as can be. For a number of reasons, Schedule 9, List 2, Paragraph 1 gives to the states power to pass laws on Islamic law on 23 topics. 22 or so of them are basically family law matters, or maybe called personal law matters. Then there is one topic of creation and punishment of offenses against the precepts of Islam, provided that the matter is not in the federal list or covered by federal law. So any crime that is covered by federal law, whether it's murder or rape or incest or kidnapping or theft, anything covered by federal law, homosexuality is covered by federal law, though it's called by a different name, it cannot be punishable, it cannot be legislated by the states. Crime is predominantly in federal hands. Also, Sharia courts have no jurisdiction over non-Muslims. Full stop. That's a clear principle. First principle, there's no compromise on that. Sharia courts have no jurisdiction over persons who are not Muslims. And of course, Dr. Farida pointed out the Criminal Jurisdiction Act 1965, where there is the 652 rule, 653, that the punishments are limited. So I think the law is clearly unconstitutional, and but law is, there are always loopholes in the law. That's what lawyers are for, isn't it? So you want me to find the loopholes for you? Please see me later on.
Sorry. I think lunch is waiting for everyone, so it's also past the time that lunch is just next door. Right. Lunch is just next door. So before that, I hope you'll join me in thanking the panel for a brief.